Hare Krishna. Jai Prabhupada. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishnaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvise Sasanjavadi Prachatita Satarine. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shadvaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Vanchakapadurubhyascha kripasindhubhyeva cha patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shadvaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda. Mukam karoti vachalam pankulangayate girim Yakripatamaham Bande Siguru Dinatarinam. I am going to read I'm going to read Sundari Radha asked a question. It seems like this question's been asked before. I'm going to read it. I thought we'd spoken about this. Here's the question. Punishment, risk, and result of committing an offense against the Vaishnava. I wanted to specifically point out when it's people that are close to you or in your environment, as there can be less awareness or self-control than, say, a senior devotee in your local temple and avoiding such offense. How to avoid and what are the huge risks that devotees run when doing this? I think we've kind of spoken about it, but perhaps we can take another angle and I just want to make sure you can hear me. I'm using my tablet, not my phone. My phone is not charged well enough to use. So just want to make sure you can hear, and maybe the picture is not as good, I don't know. So, okay. Anyway, the way our Shastras explain offense is that the greater the offense, the greater the reaction. The higher the Vaishnav, the greater the reaction. Now it doesn't mean that it's okay to offend devotees because they're not great devotees, but the greater the Vaishnav, the more severe the reaction. And then the Shastra says sometimes one stays at a distance from the Guru because there is the chance of making aparad, so it's actually safer to be at a distance because of that. And then another example is given that the sun will cause the lotus to open, the lily to close, or vice versa. I'm not sure what's what. But the same sun is causing something to open and the same sun is causing something to close. So by associating with pure devotee, it opens your bhakti, but if you don't behave properly with pure devotee, then it harms your bhakti. That's the idea. So, should we associate with senior devotees? Should we associate with our spiritual master? Of course. But then you run the risk of offending a devotee. Then we need to define offense, and what Sundari Radha is saying, it seems easier to make an offense to a devotee who you're closer to and you take for granted. And that can even happen with the spiritual master. It can happen with anyone, and it has happened even with Srila Prabhupada. And I've had godbrothers who told me that because the spiritual master is meant to be seen as a representative of Krishna and honored that way, but when one has lots and lots of association, one also sees that the spiritual master is a person. and may forget something, or that sometimes Prabhupada put two verses, quoted half a verse, and then the second half was another verse, or he didn't quote it exactly, and so someone might say, well, he's making a mistake, or once he said he wasn't a good husband, his wife was nice, but he wasn't. So one might start thinking, oh, well, he has defects, and he should have been a nicer husband, whatever, we might think. And so that even happened with Prabhupada, with some disciples. What to speak of the people you're close to. So, now, we also discussed this other problem, or this other reality, that someone who seems to be offensive is still doing devotional service. So then, that would beg the question, is what they're doing offensive? And if it is, why isn't it disrupting their devotional service? Well, sometimes these things are subtle. They're not. It's not like, well, I made an offense and I'm still chanting my rounds, so everything's okay. That means I didn't make an offense. There's a story. I just remember this story, and I was having a discussion with some devotees about the definitions of illicit sex, and what is at what point does it become sinful, and what point does it become just an impediment? It's not really sinful, but it's an impediment. Is there a point? And at what point is it pure? And I was reminded of a story, and I forget the exact details, but there were some devotees who slackened in their Krishna consciousness, and they formed a community. And Prabhupada was told in that community, they're not following all the regulative principles. They're not, in other words, they're not trying, or they're even promoting that it's okay not to. But whatever their philosophy was, I don't exactly remember, but somehow they were not following, I think, the no intoxication and no illicit sex principle. And so they had some discussion with the GBC, and they said, we're chanting, but we're still chanting, and we still, I don't know what else they were doing, but they said they were still chanting. So the GBC brought that conversation back to Srila Prabhupada. And, he said that they're not following all the regulative principles. Voluntarily, they're not following it. That had become, as far as I understand it, just had become a way of life. They didn't want to follow, or they couldn't follow, and perhaps rationalized it some way. And they said, but at least we're chanting. So they told that to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said, that chanting will take 300 lifetimes, or 300 years to fructify, because they're disobeying the order of the Guru, or they're committing sin on the strength of chanting, or they're just committing sin and chanting. In other words, the chanting wasn't pure because they weren't following the proper rules for chanting. So, because they were making an offense by disobeying the spiritual master, or making an offense by committing sinful activity, Prabhupada said, yeah, they can chant, but it'll take 300 lifetimes before it fructifies. So, I think that's a maybe similar situation to Vaishnava aparad. Okay, maybe the aparad one makes is not very severe or very disastrous, but it does affect one's bhakti, and so one may be sincere, but one may be weak, one may be foolish, one may want to be Krishna conscious, but one may have a difficult time not making offenses. I think we've seen some people, at least I've seen some people, maybe they're nice people, their intentions are well, but basically their nature is offensive. That I'm sure they were that way before they were devotees. But they're still devotees. It's not that they're wanting to be offensive, it's just they really can't help themselves. And they're going on in Krishna consciousness. Does it affect their bhakti? Of course it affects their bhakti. Does it destroy it? Not necessarily. Does it damage it or impede it in some way? Yes. So I think that's generally where we could start this conversation, that any offense to a Vaishnava is in some way harming us. As we go higher and the offenses become more severe, it harms us more, and it can harm us to the point where it can actually destroy our bhakti. And Bhagavatam Chaitanya Charitamrita has stories for our own caution of persons who offended devotees, who fell to material activities, we could say, what's the word I'm trying to think, it wasn't out of character. Out of character from their normal lives and spiritual lives, they fell into grossly sinful activities, or if not grossly sinful, very materialistic activities, not characteristic of their previous spiritual practice. So it was like I sometimes like to say, like drained out, like a vacuum cleaner just pulled their bhakti out, and they helplessly fall. So the idea is that we're cautioned, be careful and be respectful, be appreciative. All these good qualities are helpful. Now Sundari Radha is asking, what about when you know somebody closely, is there a tendency to offend? Well, I have experience of one devotee, and he's interesting because he's very Krishna conscious, and he's very sarcastic, and he's very funny, and he's extremely critical. I don't think a day goes by where he doesn't criticize someone. But the thing is, he's not. I don't want to say he's not a critical person, but he's not a vengeful person. He's not an angry person. He's not a hateful person. He's just pointing out what is, and he's a funny person, so he points it out in a funny way. And I'll give you an example. So we'll lighten up the atmosphere. There was a devotee who was getting married, a godbrother of this devotee getting married. And he said, I was invited to the wedding, but he didn't go, and he had a reason, which was very funny, but just to show you where he's coming from. And you could say this is offensive, but I just want to give you an idea of his nature. This godbrother, I believe this was his fourth marriage, third or fourth, but I think it was his fourth. So this devotee said, yeah, I was invited to his wedding, but I didn't go, and I figured I'd go to the next one. So, and he just laughed. So, is that a criticism? Yes. Is it vengeful? Not really. It's just this devotee's nature. He could have a radio show. He's really funny, and he's really smart, and he understands Krishna consciousness really well. So, like I say, he sees things as they are, he calls them as they are, and he just laughs them off, and he doesn't really hate anybody. And he's going on, he's been around like 45, 50 years, still kicking. So that hasn't destroyed his bhakti. So he's critical, but you could say he's just pointing out what's true, what devotees did, mistakes they made. He often would tell me, 20 years ago I warned them not to do this, and they didn't listen, and there was a problem. And so he's just kind of discussing what is, reminiscing. Is that the best thing for his bhakti? Probably not. Is that really destroying his bhakti, hurting him? Probably not. Probably very little. So I've always said that when we say blasphemy or criticism of devotees, when we look at the stories in which devotees fell down, you could see there was hatred, there was vengeance, there was a devotee was doing something to harm another devotee or cause problem to another devotee, or they're exhibiting hatred towards that devotee. If you think If you think about the stories in which someone has fallen in our scripture, and there are many, if you think of those stories, you study those stories, you'll see there was, they were doing something to in some way defame, blaspheme, or prevent that devotee from doing their service, or to magnify a fault which really didn't exist, to publicly magnify it. Something in which it wasn't just a little joke about them, or like, you bother me because you didn't clean the bathroom if you're married and I don't like you. But it was something spiteful, hateful. And then there was once a discussion about management. And this is interesting, because one devotee was saying, I don't know the source, but sometimes a manager may not allow a devotee to do a certain service. And it may be for the wrong reasons. It may be that they want to do it, or they want to get the credit, or they don't like the devotee, or the devotee is the wrong ethnic, in the wrong ethnic group, or the wrong gender, or something, that in some way that they unnecessarily prevent a devotee from doing service. And he said, that's an offense, to prevent a devotee in some way. Because generally, if you would prevent a devotee from doing something, I would say, not because they're not qualified or it's not practical, but if you would prevent them for a reason such as you don't want them to do it, you don't like them, you don't think they're qualified when they actually are, etc. In some way you prevent a capable person from doing some service that could be done, perhaps give it to another person, or just somehow block them from doing that service. That's an offense. And so, again, there's some, I don't know if you want to say vengeance, but for now we'll just say vengeance, or at least some anger, or some envy, or some hatred, or dislike, or some degree of something other than just, you bothered me for the last 3 minutes, and I'm going to tell you. In intimate dealings with friends, especially men, sometimes we joke with one another, and but we do it out of love and affection. And so where there's love and affection, there's no offense, even if there is offense. Okay, you might say, but what he said was offensive. Does Krishna accept it as offensive? The devotee wasn't offended. What the person said that was offensive was actually out of love, it was affection, it was a joke. And therefore, if you're intimate and close with somebody, and you're a little bit critical or so forth, but you actually love them, it's different than if it's out of vengeance, or you're blowing up something, and you're letting the world know. One of the things that we found out by doing marriage workshops, when we asked the men, we asked the women in groups, they separate and said, what don't you like about, what are things you don't like that your wife does, or what are things you don't like that your husband does? And the husbands definitely said this, I'm not sure the wives, but the wives, I would imagine, would also be upset by this. They said, when they tell others about the things that I do wrong, or when they tell others about the troubles we're having at home. So that's not nice. Is that Vaishnav aparad? I can't go to the Shastra and say that's Vaishnav aparad. But anything that is not done with a good motive, maybe you tell somebody because you want advice, but you don't want that knowledge to be known. But if your spouse isn't happy, yeah, then it's a little bit of an offense. If you're angry when you do it, if you want the world to know, yeah, all these things, but are offensive. But in close relationships with friends or spouses, usually it's predominated by affection. If you have a really bad relationship and it's not predominated by affection, it's predominated by other things, yeah, I would say that is more offensive, and there may be more reactions. And I've seen that personally, yeah. And sometimes there are reactions that weaken a person and it causes them to leave their husband or wife for a relationship, which is a huge downgrade. And if you do something that would downgrade your consciousness, or you make a bad choice, often it can be due to offenses, and you become a little bewildered or confused, or a little bit attached to sense gratification, and you make mistakes, you make wrong choices. So Sundari Radha says, what if there is too much rajas and there is lack of... I can't read this. This screen isn't so dark. Hold on. A lack of attention control in the actual moment. An offense is made, but it was not intentional or pre-planned. This could prevent or delay service from disturbance within the environment. Yeah, well, at least you know. By doing that, you're disturbed, for sure, right? And that disturbance is affecting you. So that's, whether it's offensive or not, when you disturb another person, you become disturbed. And the key point here is that it wasn't intentional, but it doesn't mean because it's not intentional, it's just not, there's not going to be any reaction. But Prabhupada has said many things to distinguish intentional acts from accidental acts, what we're talking about, breaking principles or committing offenses. Now, we had talked about this, I'm not sure when, but we talked about, the question was asked, if someone takes offense for something I've done, is it offensive? And I've discussed this with God Brothers, and they've answered yes and no. So I think that is the answer. It's both. Because Krishna may take offense. If I take offense for what you've done, then Krishna may take offense because I'm offended, even though what you did is not offensive. So your intention was not to offend or hurt, but circumstantially you did. Are you going to go to hell for 100 lives? No, because you have affection for that person. You regret what you've done. But as in any relationship, it contaminates, at least it contaminates or harms in some way the relationship. That much we can say. And as how much it harms your spiritual life, is it really considered Vaishnava aparad? At least we can say it's just not the best thing. There are many married couples, they're still devotees, they've probably criticized and offended one another a lot. That happens in relationships. Well, some, maybe not so much, but a little bit. Some more than a little bit. And some cannot live together. So and some spiritual life has been damaged by how they dealt with their wives or husbands. So, a lot of times when you're looking at this question, there's two aspects of looking at it. And the aspect you're looking at is the consequence. And then one might think, well, if there's not a bad consequence, then perhaps it wasn't so bad what I did. Right? Not a bad consequence, so I guess it wasn't so bad. But, we don't always want to look at consequences to evaluate whether something's good or bad. But just, if the action was bad, it's bad. Whether or not there's severe consequences or not, the action was wrong. So I think that's a better place to start, rather than thinking, well, I didn't get a bad reaction, so what I did must not be so bad. Which you could argue. And you're probably right. But to think that way doesn't seem right. That, we're only evaluating right and wrong based on the consequences and the results, rather than we know certain actions are right and certain actions are wrong. So I think it's better to look at it that way. Is what I did I just do something wrong? well, let me see, there seems to be no reaction, so it must not be. No, I did something wrong. I criticized the devotee, or I made this devotee feel really bad, or really discouraged, or really unhappy. That's not right. I did say something, or I did do something wrong. Okay, so that's one way of evaluating it, and you don't, without evaluating the consequence, because there may not be a big consequence because the person's close to you, you weren't vengeful, you weren't angry. Now, to get, let's say, a clearer answer to your question, how do you feel after you offend or mistreat someone that you're close to? Do you feel like your bhakti has been disturbed, your creeper has been stunted? Do you feel really weak? Do you feel lack of inspiration? Do you feel a lack of desire to serve Krishna? Do you feel the quality of your japa has gone down? I once was upset with a devotee for something they said, which I thought was very insensitive and not philosophically substantial and not characteristic of a Vaishnava. And that person had a big position, and that person's behavior and words were affecting, in a negative way, a lot of people. And it really bothered me. And because you could say he was doing things which I am diametrically opposed to doing, which I would try my best to avoid, which I would try my best to teach other devotees to avoid. And now he's doing it, and he's a leader, and he's not listening to anybody. Nobody can correct him, and many, many devotees are upset. And he's objectively doing something which is not right. But he doesn't see it, or doesn't want to admit it, or he's incorrigible. And it really bothered me. And one night, I guess this information had come to me, or perhaps I was just thinking about it. And I was becoming offensive in my mind because I was very disturbed. And I didn't have such an affectionate relationship with this person. So being offensive in my mind was quite easy because, when you have affection for someone, generally, it in some way subdues the need or desire or tendency to be offensive. We tend to be more offensive towards people that we don't like or have bad relationships with. So I didn't have any. I didn't really have what should I say? We were on different wavelengths. It wasn't the kind of devotee that I would feel a need or a desire to be close with. And so the next morning, my rounds were horrible. Like on a scale of 1 to 10, they were like at 1. So much lower than normal. And I realized, because I had offensive thoughts for this devotee, this was the reaction. And my mind was just super disturbed and super distracted, and I couldn't chant with any level of devotion or attraction. It was just horrible. And then immediately I understood. So in answer to your question, sometimes you just have to look at the consequences of your behavior. Are you so disturbed now that you can't focus, that you're not feeling Krishna conscious, that the next morning you're disturbed, it's hard for you to chant? How is it affecting you? Because, as we're saying, sometimes Vaishnava aparad, it's more subtle. It's not like, oh, I fell down. It's just my bhajan it's not working. I can't, I'm reading Prabhupada's books and nothing's happening. I'm chanting and nothing's happening. I'm doing my puja and I'm feeling nothing. These could be signs, not necessarily. Could be other reasons for that, but they could be signs that you're offending somebody. And so if you ever notice these things, I'm not saying it is a result of offense. You could just be tired or busy, or there could be other reasons. Or just been in very disturbing environments during the day. But if you can trace it back to something you've done, some criticism you've made, or some ill thoughts you have towards devotees, then you might see, yeah, I was just thinking ill of a devotee, and the next morning I couldn't chant, and it was obvious that was the reason. So that's part of your answer. Does it affect you? Yeah, it'll affect your bhajan. It could affect your service, your empowerment to do your service, or the motive with which you do service. Not necessarily going to destroy you, because the people you're close to are usually the people you like. So you're not, in your criticism, you're not necessarily maintaining any kind of vengeance towards them for more than a few moments. It's not deep. Your love or your affection is much stronger. So in that sense, I wouldn't classify it as a classical aparad that would destroy you. But I wouldn't say it's not going to hurt you, because it does, and I think we all have experience of that. And so I've always felt that the newest devotee deserves my respect. And I should never think, because of my position, I have a right to be disrespectful. Although that's human nature, that we would think that way. I'm older, I'm senior, I'm in this position, so I have a right to be belligerent. No, we don't, but sometimes we think we do. So that's important, to not take advantage of your position. So we have some more comments. So no, isn't it offensive if we act differently than our nature to avoid offenses? Not necessarily as a pretense. We're not indefinitely, shows up late as a contradictory. You're going to have to explain that to me. I'm not sure. Contradictory behavior. It seems we cannot really avoid being offensive. Seems impractical. Well, I think what you're saying is, if you have a nature where you're a little bit critical or offensive, it would be pretentious to act in a different way. And you're right and you're wrong. You actually have to be pretentious. Because I mean, Sonal, what if I said, it's not my nature to be celibate, so I'm not going to be, because I'd be pretending. It would be pretend. I'm a very, licentious person, and when I see the opposite sex, I just go up to them, talk to them, and put my arm around them, and to do anything other than that would be pretentious. And that might be true. Maybe I'm that kind of person. That's how I grew up. That was my culture. Men and women were always hugging and this and that. And there are cultures like that. They don't shake hands, they hug and kiss. So, yeah, you could say, in a sense, that would be pretentious, to just act properly and not do that and be very formal in my dealings. No, in my culture, male and female, they were all like brothers and sisters. You meet somebody, and in 2 minutes you're like their brother or sister. But now you've come into Vaishnava Sangha, now you're practicing sadhana bhakti, there's a certain behavior which you have to follow. So it's not natural for you, but you have to learn to make it natural. So especially if we're speaking about being offensive, and you say, well, that's my nature, I'm very sarcastic. And people tell me things, and seniors tell me things, and I just think, they're just on some ego trip, and I don't have to respect them. That's okay. I don't want to say it's okay, but if that's how you are, that's how you are. But now that you're practicing Vaidhi Bhakti, if you act that out, it's going to be harmful for you. So yes, it will be pretentious. It will be unnatural. But there's so many things which are pretentious and unnatural for us that are all bad activities that we have to stop. Right? So there's a lot of holes in that argument, Sonal. Because if you extend that to all your activities, then basically we could say, using that logic, that, well, whatever I do naturally, I just do. Because I don't want to pretend. No, but actually Vaidhi Bhakti there's a lot of pretending. I don't like to chant, but I do it. I'm not pretending to like it, but I just do it. So, I understand what you're saying. You're saying, I can't pretend to like this person if I don't. Okay, let's go with that, because I'll agree with that. You can't. But you can be respectful, even if you don't like them. If they're a senior person, you don't like them, they give you some instruction you don't like, they don't treat you well, okay, be respectful, don't be offensive. Say, yes. I had a discussion with a godbrother, and he was talking to me about something, and I thought it was a discussion, but after about 5 minutes into the discussion, I realized it was a lecture. It was a one-way lecture, and I was just supposed to listen and not say anything. And every time I said something, he didn't really agree with it, or didn't want to discuss it, didn't want to entertain the idea, and just kind of shut it off. And so the main purpose of meeting was to just tell me what he had to tell me and not discuss it. So I guess I was dull, because I'd never actually been in a situation like that, at least not in the last 48 years. It caught me off guard. And after about 5 minutes, I realized that, he just wants me to listen and accept what he's saying. He doesn't want to discuss it. So at the end I said, okay, I understand what you're saying. You're in charge here, and I think that's the right thing that I should follow. I didn't agree with what he said, but I did agree that because I was in his world, his area, that he was in charge, I should follow the standard that he wants me to follow, or the standards that he set for that zone. So I said, you're in charge here. I have to follow what you say. And he was very happy. And then after I left the meeting, I still disagreed with what he said. What he said, it kind of illumined me as to his point of view and why he would say it, but it didn't convince me that what he was saying was without some loopholes in his logic and argument. So that's my nature, If someone's trying to convince me of something and they can't substantiate it well enough, based on Prabhupada's instructions and substantiate it, especially on the practical consequences of what they say. If the consequences are bad, even if they say this is the Siddhanta, and I say, yeah, but you preach this Siddhanta and the whole movement's going to be destroyed. Did you have to adapt this Siddhanta to time, place, and they don't want to adapt it. I'm not of the nature to say, okay, just because it's Siddhanta, that we all should preach this. If we're preaching this and not applying it well, and it's producing a bad result, I'm not going to preach it the way you want me to. I wouldn't preach it that way, because I'm concerned about helping devotees, not just getting them to understand something, but getting them to digest it, apply it according to their position in a way that will be beneficial. So that's how I think. And so, using your argument, I would say, yes, that I can't pretend to not think that way. I do think that way. But I did agree to follow him while in his zone, because he asked me, and that was the whole purpose of the meeting, was just to tell me that this is what I have to do. So I said, okay, but that was the right thing to do, and it was respectful. And he was happy. So that's my point. So it may not be your nature, but there is an etiquette. And that etiquette allows for the flow of bhakti. That's the point. You understand? It just makes bhakti work. Now, if you don't follow the etiquette, you have friction and problems. Now, internally, I disagreed, but externally, I followed an etiquette because it just worked. Now, if I go some other part of the world, I'm not obligated to speak the way he wanted me to speak, because I think the way he wanted me to speak has its limitations and is not applicable in every situation. And I would feel very stifled if I couldn't express my understanding of something, but I could only express it in the way he wanted me to. So, okay, in another situation, another environment, what I say may be very much appreciated and accepted. In another environment, it's not. So I respect him. There's an etiquette. He's senior to me. He's in charge. Okay, but you could call it pretentious. Not really, because I don't think he did a good job of convincing me of his point of view. And so I wasn't convinced. So I'm not being pretentious in the sense that it hasn't changed the way I see something, but it's changed the way I would talk about it in his zone, because that's what he asked me to do, and out of respect for his position, I'll do that. Does that answer your question? If it doesn't, then you can ask again. So Vidarbha is asking, in the course of trying to preach, we sometimes have to take a stand or create boundaries to protect new people so that they don't get confused. If it is done without malice, but just to facilitate the service, is that detrimental to our own growth? No. It's a general question, so I don't know specifics, but as a general answer, if you're trying to protect somebody, insulate somebody from maybe a situation that's toxic, or from maybe protect them from people you think were not really expert at dealing with new people, or maybe who are very black and white, and this person would not respond to that preaching, then profound offense. If you, what I think it was helpful in this situation is to recognize that we're all different, and different devotees will preach differently. So some devotees will preach very down the center. It's not white. It's not black. It's just, or no. Let's go back. Some devotees will preach very black and white. Some will preach in a very narrow way, which is more or less the same thing. And what they're preaching, it's not wrong, but it may be wrong for that person. And if you see that, then it's not like you dislike the person for preaching that way. You just understand that that's how they see, that's what they think is the best way to preach. And that's how they preach. That's their nature. That's how they see the world. Some devotees are you can't really discuss philosophy with them. They just have an idea, and that's it. And so you know, okay, he's a nice devotee, but his idea may not translate well for new people. So you don't dislike that devotee, you just understand that their preaching may not be suitable. And sometimes it's just that they're not aware of what the person needs to hear. And if they were, maybe they wouldn't have said that. But whatever the case is, I would not say it's offensive if you didn't want a person to hear from somebody, if you felt that would be upsetting to that person, or wouldn't be in their best interest at that point. And you can be respectful to that devotee you don't want them to hear, but just say, I know how he preaches, I know where he's coming from, he's a very nice devotee, but I don't think it's good for this person to hear. And so, or I have to undo some things that he said, or I have to explain what he said because it upset this devotee. As long as you're not hateful, spiteful towards that devotee, I would not say it's offensive. You're just trying to serve that new person. And what you're presenting is a reality we sometimes run into. There are in some cases where you have a specific group of people and you've been bringing them up in Krishna consciousness in a specific way. And there are certain devotees that understand your strategy and who would be ideally suited to mentor those people or to do programs with those people. And there are certain devotees who don't share that angle or don't preach that way, don't think that's the best way to preach. And if they preach to those people, it could confuse them or disrupt them or even make them want to leave. So it's a reality we deal with. It's definitely a reality in ISKCON. And it could be that you're preaching very conservatively and this preacher is very liberal, or you're preaching very liberally and this preacher is very conservative, and it would confuse people. It's not a judgment here of whose preaching is right or wrong, but I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt that you understand how to preach to these people, and therefore you arbitrate who would be suitable and who wouldn't be, because you're interested in them. Okay, Sundari Radha says, yes, I have been apologized to for things I don't actually recall, or sometimes don't even think about don't think about, yet the other person feels an offense was made. And I think that's good. If you feel you've made an offense, you should apologize. And probably when the other person apologizes, they feel relieved. So, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he definitely recommends asking forgiveness if you think you've committed an offense. And if you're not sure, say, Prabhu Mataji, I don't know, I think I may have offended you when I said this or did this, and if I did, just please forgive me. Oh no, I don't even remember you doing that. People do that to me all the time. Please forgive me, 6 years ago I did this, and I go, I never noticed that you did it, I don't remember that you did it, but I can see that for them it was important because they felt it was wrong. So Krishna Karshini has something here. I'm not using... I'm going to see if I can... Hold on a second. I have to see if I can... I'm using my tablet. It's so much darker than my phone. And right now, I'm not exactly sure if I can make it lighter. Anyway. I'll try to read it. Being married 20 years, I know from my own experience that in marriage, frictions happen from time to time. If I say something unpleasant to my husband, he doesn't take it as an offense. That's good. I hope the same. I have the same. We just forgive each other. Forget about it, because you know that it wasn't intended to offend and it wasn't out of spite. You know that there's affection between you, so you don't take offense. That's perfect. During being married, I offended my husband out of anger. So if Krishna would take it as offense, I would not be a devotee any longer. Yes, it's true. So I think that substantiates my point that affection is the underlying foundation of your relationship, so that if there is an offense, it's not actually offense, or at least it's not a fully bona fide offense, because there's too much affection in the relationship for it to be offense. At the moment, you could say, for your Bhakti Shastri exam, that was an offensive statement by the standard of Scripture. I just criticized, but you would say, yeah, I didn't really mean it. It's not exactly like what the Shastra says is an offense. And the point you're making is the point I made. You're underscoring the point I made. If it were offensive, you would have been your devotional service would have been impacted to some degree. And or the fact that you're still married means it's not. But Krishna Karshani, we could say there's some couples who aren't married, so maybe in their case it wasn't loving, it was vengeful, and it was offensive, and they couldn't stay together because of the offenses being made. I think that's also a reality that we see. So I convinced Sonal. Now she's going to be respectful, even if she thinks somebody's saying the wrong thing. Yeah. Vidarbha says, I'm loving your classes every day. It's wonderful to start the day. Such practical disclosures. Yeah, so I was just having a little conversation with Krishna Karshani before the class started, and you have this situation where you have a philosophy, like you're saying, it seems that I'm offensive if I maybe disagreed with what a senior devotee was preaching because I felt younger devotee wouldn't understand it exactly or wasn't presented well, or perhaps we're doing something that, according to Prabhupada's instructions or Shastra, seems to be in defiance of those instructions or disobeying those instructions. Yet at the same time, when you look at it practically, it's not exactly like that. And so you have these two things going on. Here's the instruction, but practically, if I follow that instruction, is that actually going to help the situation, and does there need to be some adjustment? So sometimes in my classes, I take the philosophy, then I look at it practically in terms of how would you apply that in a way that is effective, and is there a way to apply that with a misunderstanding so it wouldn't be effective, or even a way to apply it as it is, but in a way that it would cause trouble for someone because they can't follow it. And without minimizing the instruction, is there a way to adapt it to their situation, perhaps compromise it or expand upon it so that they could follow it in a broad sense, and or they could come to the point where they could follow the exact instruction in the future. And I think that's an extremely important aspect of understanding our philosophy. And if we try to understand our philosophy within a vacuum in terms of theory, without its practical application in the world, in the way the world is, then it's not, in many cases it won't help. And so, Vidarbha, what you presented, I travel a lot, and so what you presented is a very common problem. Many devotees have told me they have this problem, that to be quite honest and frank, that they don't feel some of our centers are really good places for certain classes of people to come, and they would prefer not to bring them. And these are good devotees. And it's not necessarily a criticism of the management of the temple or anything. It's just that people aren't ready for religion. And so it may be that what that devotee said was perfect, but it just wasn't applicable to the level of this person. In one temple, they have a kirtan program at an apartment about a half a block from the temple. And so I was asking the devotee about it. I said, well, how does that work? Do they know you're devotees? What about the temple? And he said, they don't even see the temple. They don't even know there's a temple here. They just know there's a kirtan. And if they knew there was a temple, that may be a turnoff because they don't like religion. But those same people, eventually, a lot of them become Krishna conscious. They become devotees. So in that particular time and circumstance, bringing them to the temple would not be good, which sounds offensive, doesn't it? To say, I don't want to bring him to the temple, it wouldn't be good for him. In and of itself, how do you support that in Shastra? Because Shastra says if you see the deity, you take Charanamrita, you see the devotee, etc., you become purified. And now I'm saying, I don't want them to see devotees, I don't want them to see deities, Charanamrita, if you bow down. I brought my sister to the temple when Prabhupada came. I said, bow down. She bowed down. Wow, it was the best thing. Best thing. And she got to see Prabhupada, wow, and bow down to him. It's fantastic. But, not everybody's ready for that. So I don't think it's offensive. I think it's just real. And if we don't confront the realities, then our philosophy can exist in a vacuum. And the realities are changing. Now, obviously, we're not going to change our philosophy because realities change, but we're going to change implementation because realities do change. The world's different. And I think a lot of devotees have recognized this reality that we are not always prepared for a world that's changing. It changed, and we're when the 90s came, we were still in the 80s or 70s. And some people may argue we're still in the 70s or the 60s. And the world's changed a lot. So that's an explanation of, I think, what I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to do as a preacher, because I see the need for it. And sometimes we'll adjust something, because for certain devotees that adjustment is necessary. But we won't adjust the philosophy, we'll adjust the practice. So this is the philosophy, this is the standard. In the Gita, Krishna says, if you can't follow this standard, follow this standard. If you can't follow this standard, follow this standard. If you can't follow this standard. So there is some precedent for that. Okay, Shyamasundar, why are you smoking? Can you stop smoking? I don't know, Prabhupada. Can you smoke one less cigarette a day? Yes, Prabhupada, I can do that. After 30 days, he stopped smoking. Or after how many cigarettes are in the pack. So that was the standard Prabhupada gave him. All right, smoke one less a day. Is that our philosophy? Smoke one cigarette less a day? It's not our philosophy. How do you substantiate that? But our philosophy is do something that will help people become Krishna conscious. So that's how you would substantiate it in this situation. So I think I find it's so inspiring and enlivening to discuss philosophy in terms of application and practice, not only for us, but for people in general, how they'll practice it, how people in general will understand it, how to present it to them so they understand it and they can be inspired and enthusiastic and get the point. And the point may be very strict, but get it without being upset by it, because it's so strict and heavy, and then allowing it to be applied individually. So Krishna Karshani says, you said that managers like temple president may be offensive, not letting specific service done by capable devotee. Anybody, anyone who prevents a devotee, it's considered. It's considered offensive or just something that shouldn't be done. It's not proper. And it looks, sometimes you can't facilitate everyone's service, but if you're preventing them for the wrong reasons, that's offensive. It looks that being temple president is risky. In Poland, at the temple, presidents, Poland temple fell down and are no longer devotees. So we are having awkward situation right now because probably out of fear, of falling down. No one wants to be in charge. It's like, if you're a temple president, you have an excellent facility, to serve the devotees and advance, you also have an excellent facility to offend the devotees and fall down. I can't say they fell down because they offended devotees, but certainly being temple president awards one that facility, that's for sure. It's also sometimes a difficult job, and one may compromise their service, their sadhana. But we do find that it's not uncommon for some devotees in high positions, due to the pressure on them, to offend devotees. And they may not be offensive people by nature, but they need to get things done, and maybe devotees aren't cooperating, they're not willing. Then the temple president is burdened with too much service, and then he has a very unfavorable attitude for all the people who won't help him. And then he may internally become offensive. That's also possible. And when you're a leader, you know, if you don't like somebody, it kind of gets magnified, and you can't not like everybody if you're a leader. You can't be prejudiced against certain devotees. It doesn't work. It's just, you can do that if you're not a leader, because you're not it's just your own thought, and you're not dealing with everybody, and you can avoid the people you don't like. If you're a leader, you can't avoid people you don't like. You're interacting with them all the time. So you can have prejudice. It will be very destructive, at least in my estimation of being a leader. It's unhealthy. Because leadership means you really have to respect the people you're leading. You really have to serve them. You have to facilitate them. Archita says, thank you for this class. I've heard that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu removes the reactions caused by the offensive thoughts. Do you believe this is to be true? If so, does this also apply to the Holy Dham? Well, it is said Mahaprabhu doesn't take any offense, personally. You chant the Panchatattva Maha Mantra, then you chant Hare Krishna, he won't take offense. You worship the deity, he won't take offense. But in the Shastra, it says, when you offend a Vaishnava Mahaprabhu, it says, if you offend a Vaishnava and you chant Hare Krishna, then it feels like, to Mahaprabhu, it feels like your chanting feels like you're throwing burning pieces of wood at his body. So, the other thing is, let's say for the sake of argument, Mahaprabhu did not take offense even though you offended a devotee, but it's not true. But let's say he decides not to take offense. He forgives the offense. Well, the fact is you made an offense, and it will likely have some disturbing element in your mind. Likely. It's just going to bother you, because that's the way offenses work. So even if you say he didn't take offense, but you made an offense, then you'll be somewhat affected by it. Maybe you won't fall down, but you'll be somewhat disturbed. That's the nature of it. It's just the nature of passion and ignorance. If you're doing something in passion and ignorance, you're going to be disturbed by it, right? Even if you offend a non-devotee. If you're angry, you're angry, and anger's, it's going to affect you in a negative way. So at least that much is true, right? That much we understand. But I wouldn't say Mahaprabhu is not offended, because it's one of the offenses to the holy name to blaspheme a devotee. So he's not offended if you apologize to that devotee. Then okay. Krishna Karshi says, I agree with you. Thank you. You better agree with me, Krishna Karshini, or I won't like you. I agree with you that in relationship, affection is the key. If there is love and respect, even if spouses are fighting from time to time, it's not really offensive in terms of Vaishnava aparad. But if spouse We have another scenario, a nasty spouse, right? But if spouses don't love each other, maybe even go to the point of hating each other, if they are fighting, it might be Vaishnava aparad, because it lacks of attraction. Yeah, I agree. You don't want to hate anybody. That's for sure. That's not a character of a Vaishnava. So if you're hating a person, especially the person you're supposed to be taking care of and serving, it's not good. Whether you're a husband, a wife, a temple president, a guru, Prabhupada never hated anyone. I think, to me, it's one of the most amazing qualities of Prabhupada, that he's just like, people could deal with him however they did, but he never hated anybody. I mean, if they preached Mayavad, he hated what they were preaching. That's for sure. And he may have hated what people were doing, but he didn't hate people. He just didn't. And Prabhupada had some pretty strange disciples, for sure, but he didn't hate them, and he dealt with people who were antagonistic. He didn't hate them. He just didn't have hatred. And so let's look at that example. And, he wasn't so fond of his wife, but one devotee had a conversation with Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was with his son, and Prabhupada told his son, he said, actually your mother's very good. I was not a very good husband. So he didn't have that, even though we have the story, either T or me and all that, it wasn't like Prabhupada was carrying any ill feelings towards her at all. We just didn't see that in Prabhupada, And he may have criticized things that his godbrothers had done that were wrong, but you didn't see that there was hatred there. It was just, he just saw that they had failed in following Srila Bhaktisiddhanta properly. So I think it's a very good point. If there's, devotees don't hate. We just, we're not supposed to. At least let's leave it at that. We're not supposed to hate. What to speak of the person you're married to, the person you're supposed to love, you end up hating. And then loving the person you're not supposed to love, so to speak, not supposed to love. So what you say is, I think it's valid, and I think we can conclude if in a relationship it's dominated by hatred and revenge, and there's really no affection, and that relationship is amongst devotees, it will have some bearing on their Krishna consciousness, for sure. And we see the result of that. Sometimes after divorce, one or both of the partners don't do well because there was a lot of offenses. There were a lot of offenses going on. And sometimes couples separate just because they believe it's the best thing to do, but there's no hatred there. It's time to separate. So, I don't think we should hate any devotee. I like to say, something like, you shouldn't hate any devotee. Even the ones you hate, you shouldn't hate. Or I like to say, you should love all the devotees, even the ones you hate. And Prabhupada loved all of us, even the ones that weren't lovable. He tolerated all of us, even we weren't tolerable. So I think we should follow that example and be tolerant and loving. I just told Sundari Radha the other day, I said that we have to forgive our spouses, and you can apply this to all devotees. We have to forgive all devotees for being who they are. Like, I don't like you because who you are. No, that's just who you are. So in a sense, I have to forgive you for being who you are, because if I don't forgive you for being who you are, I won't like you, and I'll have a very negative attitude towards you. And I think you all have experience of how you feel when you have a negative attitude towards devotees and how you feel when you have a positive attitude. And if you have a negative attitude towards any devotee, if somehow you could just have a positive attitude towards them, even if you disagree with them or dislike certain things they do or dislike everything they do, but if somehow or other, of course you wouldn't dislike everything they do, and if somehow or other you could just be positive towards them, you will feel more Krishna conscious. You will feel that's the right way to think. And if you have negative attitude, you can feel that it's just somewhat harmful for your devotional service. So why wouldn't that be true for a spouse? I think it would be. Okay, so we can stop now. I have only 2 more days before I leave for China, and I have about 35 videos to make, I think. No, even more. And so I'm going to start now. My rounds are done at 7:30 in the morning. And I'm going to start doing a marathon, because once I leave, I'll be gone for 3.5 months, and it's unlikely I'll be able to do videos, or it'll be more difficult. Possible, it'll be possible in some places, but to spend the whole day doing videos, that'll be difficult. So I am leaving on Wednesday. I believe I arrive on China on Thursday, and China is, I don't know how many hours later. So, and we'll be doing programs which I can try to broadcast on Facebook. And I don't know about Saturday morning, Saturday. Yeah, it just depends on my schedule. So I'll stay in touch with Guru Nishta, and then we'll figure out something, but I'll doing a lot of programs for non-devotees. I don't think I'm doing a lot for devotees, but we'll see how that goes. I mean, I could, if there's devotees around, I like to read, I can read with them. Ajita's going to come there. Jaya Jita, she's unconquerable. Unborn, right? No, is it unconquerable, right? Jita, yeah, unconquerable. Yeah, okay. So, thank you for watching. We'll be in touch soon. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Gaur Premanandi. Hare Hare.